Hello, world, and welcome to the Innovation Coaching Podcast. My name is Klaus Hostel, and I'm here today with Iryna Oleksiuk. Iryna, tell me how I can help.
It's not the first time we're doing it, and now you're getting so much better at pronouncing my first name and last name. Kudos to you.
I think if I learn nothing else, then at least I get better at some people. Most people's names, I butcher them terribly, and my only defense is that most people have no idea how to pronounce my name. So it's not a fair defense, but it's the one I use.
All right, I take that. So let's dive in. So here's the story. Let's start with the story. I work as a public speaking trainer, and what I'm thinking of is developing a new product, a specific product. And let me tell you a bit of a backstory about it. And then I hope that you can poke holes in my thinking about it or say, hey, you know what? This thing or the way you're approaching this project it needs to change or something along those lines because you're very good at that. So, the backstory is I've been to a couple of different, very fancy and very interesting events recently. And it's about talking numbers, it's about between 3 and 5 events in the last 6 months. Let's put it this way. Some of them online, some of them face to face. And an element that has been quite shocking when it comes to business talks. So I used to organize TEDx Warsaw. This is not talking TED or TEDx talks right now. This is business talks, especially when the speaker was somebody who was at an executive level. So I had an assumption. This is my assumption, my bias, that every single one of them is going to be brilliant. That every single one of them is going to be, and what I mean brilliant, because brilliant can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. I meant the person would be laser sharp in their thinking. Their thought process would be clean and clear cut. They would not use words such as a lot, very, few, sometimes, somewhere. I rather thought that if I go to an event or to events where I have executives speaking for hours, I would come out with, as if I've read a brilliant encyclopedia or like the most distilled version of what's happening in the world. And I actually wrote down some of the things that I heard to make it practical for our listeners. I would hear things such as there is a lot of uncertainty right now, or we don't want to become isolated as a business, or how can we collaborate with the broader ecosystem? And the sad thing with each one of these is that why people who say them are super smart. I mean, it takes incredible endurance and smarts to become a leader of an organization. And then I'm sure then when somebody says there's a lot of uncertainty right now, to them, it means a number of cases, very specific insights, something distilled, unique, and something valuable. But when I hear as a listener, there is a lot of uncertainty right now, what happens to me, I completely disengage and I just go, really? Really? After 2 years of COVID and then the war in Ukraine just across the border, in Europe, really, there is a lot of uncertainty right now. This is why I came to this event, and this is why I'm giving you a piece of my life, so I can hear that there's a lot of uncertainty. So, what I was thinking as I stepped away from the event, I was thinking, so there are some people who are really good at this work, and then they don't need me. And then actually, one of them, I came up to him and I said, "Hey, thank you for your speech. I'm so glad that most of the speakers are not like you, because then I'd be out of the job." But then there are quite a number of people where I was thinking, oh my goodness, this is not that good. And these people are way too smart and they don't sound as smart as they are, or their smarts don't come across. And I thought, it would be interesting to build a product just for that, but also considering the reality of these people that I'm sure they're extremely busy. And I know from my own example that many of the people during these events, they are offered possibility to work with a speaker with like a sounding board or to work with a speaker trainer, and they wouldn't take advantage of it because many of them think that they are good as it is or they don't need it. So my question, do I have a question? So probably the question would be in a sort of a design thinking forward format, which is how might I build a product for busy executives who don't think they have a problem to help them sound as smart as they are?
I love that. I love that. And I recognize that. Oh, I recognize that. So let's pick this apart because there are a couple of things here where I don't know anything more than others. And then there are a couple of things where I know a thing or two that might be useful to you.
Klaus, just to double check, have I painted the picture clear enough? Is it context wise?
Very clear.
Yeah. Okay.
Very clear. Yeah. I've been biting my tongue not to start talking for a while. So you've made a very, very clear and concise painting of the situation.
Right.
Let's see if we can twist it a little bit. So first, a couple of things, and some of this you'll know already, our listeners may not. Some of it you might not, and I don't know what's what, so I'll just preach a little bit, and then you can just ignore the stuff you know already and say aha to the stuff you didn't. First off, as you said, this is just me agreeing with you, a lot of these speakers think they're great. Now, the reason they do that is that very few of them ever experience somebody telling them they suck. Or even if they don't suck, that they're just mediocre. So they have a lived experience of people coming up and saying really interesting and really good and wow, that blew me away. And of course, they take that to heart. Who wouldn't? I certainly do when I speak. I'm very happy when somebody comes up and say, wow, that was really good. But they don't necessarily have a mechanism for having somebody tell them, hey, you could be much better. So number one is they don't know, because how the hell would they know?
So it's like an emperor is naked kind of thing,
Kind of
or
like the emperor is naked.
maybe not as extreme, right? But it's just,
Yes,
let me see if I get that right. So one of the reasons could be is that the reason the person is oblivious to the fact that they could improve is because, I love how you phrase that, they don't have the mechanism for getting that information back. So if they keep getting positive reinforcement for how they do things, why would they wake up one day and go, I would like to improve I would like to improve how I do my public speaking and my speeches, right? Because I keep getting signals that I'm doing well enough or I'm doing great. So why would I change anything all of a sudden? Okay.
exactly. Exactly. And if you're at the level of confidence or skill or kind of exposure where you already have thought those thoughts and thought, okay, I'd like somebody to keep me honest, or I'd like somebody to help me improve, or I'd like somebody to tell me how I could be better. And then you not only have people you ask, but people you trust who can answer. What the reality is for many, many speakers, and I've seen this, and event organizers, it's the same circus. They are used to asking people the terrible question, hey, did you like it? And most people will either say something, either because they did like it, which is lovely, then they say, oh, wow, it was really great. Great talk, great event, great workshop, great whatever, which is nice. Or they will find something positive and say, I really liked your example about the Crimean War, because then they're being positive, and then they might have some other thoughts about other parts of it that they don't say, but they at least say something honest that they did like, or they'll say, yeah, it was good. And one of the reasons I know this is that I'm not those people. And the shock I register on people's faces when they make the daring move of asking me, especially at events, so did you like it? And I always say,
So they get the Danish feedback.
yeah, and I always say, are you sure you want to ask me that? Remember, I'm biased. I'm an old fart. This is my space, and I can be a bit rough. Are you sure you want to ask me that?
Mm-hmm.
And say, yeah, I'd really like to know what you think. And then they divide into two categories. The ones who, the moment I start speaking, go, oh, wow, I'm not getting this feedback from anyone. Keep talking. And then the ones who obviously were not looking for that sort of feedback, and I can see their eyes just glaze over, and it goes into this man saying evil stuff, must get away from man. One of those modes. And the fun part is if it's in organizations where I know some of the people, I've even had, there's a Danish leadership kind of network, that the President's Institute. And I've been part of that for a couple of years. I've been going to their events for a couple of years. And every time somebody new would come there, they'd always go for they do these huge events that are really nice. They'd always go and say, hey, Klaus, did you like it? And then the kind of the experienced ones, the ones who knew me already, would go, you're in for it now. And it became this running joke that whenever they had new people who came in all bright-eyed, they would ask me, because I'd hang around with them and I'd have opinions and I'd be kind of fun. They'd ask me, and the experienced ones would be like, okay, you're going to get the speech now. And they're like, what do you mean? Oh, you just press the button. You click the Klaus feedback thing, and you will learn stuff, but you may not wish that you learned it. And generally, these people, they were cool enough that once they'd gotten over the, oh, okay, then they started really listening, to their credit. But if you ask somebody, and I know it for myself, if you ask somebody for feedback and you're expecting they'll say something nice, and they say, yeah, to be honest, it was kind of shit. And here's why. Then that's not a good mind space to be in. And if you think that you're going to find these people, you're dreadfully wrong, because most of the time they have no incentive to tell you the truth. I lose out on a lot of friendships and work by telling people the truth. And every time I do it and somebody ends up not reacting super well, I think, oh, I need to learn to do this differently. And then I remember all the ones who say, thank you for that honesty. Thank you for telling me the things I'm actually looking for, because nobody tells me what's going on. And then I stick to it. That's rare.
You've just said a crucial thing there. Towards the end, you said, thank you. That's exactly what I'm looking for. So, one of the things I'm taking away that there, it sounds like for those people who appreciate it and who are really taken on board, even if there was not an aware or like a conscious decision, they were seeking this information.
Bingo.
So there was something in them that was pulling that information inside versus if something, versus where you're trying, even though they kind of ask, they don't, it's not, it's kind of, you would be pushing the information into them rather than there's truly a space or an opening to listen to things.
Yes, exactly.
What I'm hearing there's the drive is internal, even if the proposal comes from your side, but the drive to do the work is an internal type of drive.
Yes, and part of the tricky thing is that we are so fed with the idea that we should always be asking for feedback, and we should always be learning, and we should never say no to good ideas, and all this sort of stuff that's true, but also very, very hard on a human level. And I found with myself, I've been doing creative production for many, many years, and I found that my life improved kind of on an emotional level when I got better at asking for the right sort of stuff. When I got better at saying to people, I'd like you, just as you did, here's an idea, I'd like you to shoot it full of holes. And if you can't, then that's good. And if you can, then I'm listening. Is very different from saying, I did a thing, please say something nice about it. And I've gotten pretty good at telling people directly, saying, I did a thing, I'd like you to say something nice about it. And if you can't, just lie. Because right now I'm just looking for some pats on the back.
I really like that.
I'm not looking for critical feedback. I sometimes do that, but these are for me two different modes. And if you're in the mode of you just got off stage and you're just high and everybody's going, oh my God, you're so wonderful, you're so great. And then you ask the next person who's standing there and say, yeah, you had me for the first 10 minutes. And afterwards, I just realized you're a hot windbag with nothing to really share.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you're ripping off this theory that you don't even know about. Then it's much easier to go, oh, that person had a bad day, than say, maybe there's something here I should be aware of. So first thing is finding the people who actually will give you honest feedback if you didn't cultivate that relationship is very rare and not necessarily pleasant. Number two, if you are already looking for that honest feedback and have people in place who you trust and can give it to you, then you don't need what you're proposing. Or maybe you might need it because you might be one of those people, but that's a very different thing. And that brings us to the biggest part of the biggest group of these people are the ones who, again, they don't have that mechanism. So they think they're great because why should they think differently? And if somebody says to them they're terrible, then either they don't listen or they shrug it off unless it comes at the right time. And I'm no better. I've gotten that from, I did a training and I had surprisingly bad feedback from it. And I remember some of that trying to figure out what could I learn. And there were some learning points, but some of it I just brushed off and said, this guy who's given me a 1 out of 5 rating for my content because of does the trainer know what he's talking about? I said, obviously this guy doesn't know anything. This is very obvious. I know my stuff, right? You can agree with the style. You can think that I know what I'm doing. You can like me as a person. You can have some ideas about a lot of stuff, but do I know the things that, yeah, I know my stuff. So I just took that and just brushed it off. Where if I'd asked somebody, hey, we've worked together for 10 years on us, you know me pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Does it come across that I actually, when I talk about the theory of Thiel and Frederic Laloux's work, does it come across as if I know what I'm talking about? He said, you know what? It doesn't. Then I'd listen,
Mm-hmm.
even if they're saying the same thing. So that's the one part of the puzzle that I think makes it harder. The second part is that if you don't know that you could be better and you don't know that you need help, then you're of course not going to say yes to all these offers. Of course, right? Why would you? If somebody offers to do speaking coaching for me, I'm probably going to say no. Unless it's somebody I really respect or trust or like, or I want to butter them up, or I'm having a bad confidence day, or whatever that looks like. In general, I'm pretty confident with my own skill level. And a lot of executives are as well. So that's one part of the puzzle. The second part, which I also think plays a major role, is that I've been to some of these events as well. And the craziest one actually at the President's Institute guys, one thing they run, the big President's Summit. I was just at 4,000 people, C-level, most of them from the Nordic countries, and world-class speakers and great stuff. They had a guy, I want to say 5 years ago or so, and he was this American security advisor, and his credentials made him sound like he was probably the smartest guy in the world. And he probably was and probably is, but he was not fit for the stage. And that meant that during his talk, 45 minutes, more than 1,000 people left the room.
Oh, wow.
And the sight and sound of 1,000 people getting out of chairs and just filing out of the room in twos and threes and fives and tens, that is shattering.
That hurts. Just imagining that hurts.
Painful.
Jesus. I'm so sorry for that.
And he just kept on going, which I don't know if maybe he was oblivious, and maybe he just thought, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to keep on going. Maybe he didn't, I don't know. But it meant that 1,000 people out of maybe 2.5 or so just left the room because he was so bad. Not because he wasn't smart, not because he wasn't passionate or dedicated or had integrity, but because he simply was not good on the stage. And that leads us to problem number 2. And this is one of my pet peeves as a public speaker, is that we hire people or we bring them on stages because of what they know, and we ask them to come back because of how they perform.
Say that again?
We bring people on stages because of what they know, and we ask them to come back because of how they perform. Because somewhere along the way, and I don't know how it happened, it definitely wasn't me who did it. This was the world at a bad place. Somewhere along the line, we mistook knowledge for delivery. And that means that if you have 2 people who you're considering put on a stage, corporate stage, and one of them has a PhD in behavioral science, and the other has got nothing, but is brilliant at talking about behavioral science, then number 1 is going to get that speaking slot 9 times out of 10. Because number 1 is easier to justify. Oh, why is this person speaking well? She's got a PhD in behavioral science. And we want to know about behavioral science. Oh, so she's smart, she's knowledgeable. And the other guy? Oh, yeah, he's fun and he's engaging and everybody remembers him. And oh, I've seen him on stage 16 years ago and it was really great. But no, he doesn't have the PhD or the 20 years at Disney or the deep expertise within whatever scene it is. And some of the really great people, the really great speakers, they're both. They both know their stuff and they've got their credentials and they're brilliant. These are the ones that are hard to compete with. But for a lot of us, especially those of us who kind of traveled from stage to stage and dip our toes into many different industries, we constantly end up, and here I say we, because I'm one of these people, we end up going to events and getting kind of audience feedback and audience votes of like, oh, top-rated speaker of this event and so brilliant on stage and
Yes.
wow, which is really nice and not humbling at all. In fact, it's rather bad for the ego because it's hard not to think, well, obviously I know some stuff. But then when we ask, okay, so should kind of, okay, so do you want me to come talk at another event? Oh, no, we need somebody who knows something. And one of the things that I've found, which is both to my detriment and has been a help, has been that if you're really good at speaking, public speaking, then if you interview somebody who knows something, then usually half an hour later, you can get on a stage and deliver that in a way that makes people go, wow, even if you knew nothing before.
100%.
While if you're really smart and really knowledgeable, then half an hour speaking training isn't going to make you a lot better.
100%. It's actually just last week. There was a person who was first giving a talk, and the talk was okay, and it was a famous politician. But then the person went into doing a Q&A with a famous journalist, and the Q&A was just, it was magnificent. And the person came alive, and there was so much authenticity, and there were parts of where the person was answering the question where people were moved to tears. I could see that across the room, and it was in the room full of business leaders. So in the speech, it was very okay. It was civil. It was civil. But in the Q&A, it just came alive. And then later on, during the coffee break, having conversations with people, that the impression that I had was the impression that most of the people had. And then I was thinking, if we only got that speech, what a loss.
Bingo.
Because that whole human was there the whole time, right? And then it was just took asking those questions to bring those things out, but those tremendously interesting and valuable things, the unique perspective that only that person had would not have been available to us if the format was not adjusted.
Bingo.
Right. So I have the most, yeah. So this is a recent example from last week where I saw that in action, and it absolutely does work like that. And then the question is, how, right? So if I bring this back into the commercial space of actually building a product for people to help sound like those really clever people who they absolutely are, to package what's inside their heads so they don't have to have, this is not to disrespect the interviewers, but not to have the crutch or not to have to rely on somebody else to get the interesting out of them on stage. But if they take responsibility for their own performance or for their own delivery, right? If we go into that space, if the person doesn't have the need, the felt need for an improvement, where does one begin? Is it, do you become a bringer of bad, like you become a bearer of bad news? Or like, is it shaping the information space so that the information around improvement shows up? So I was thinking, straight after the event, because some of my colleagues were working as coaches for the speakers, and I was thinking actually it could have been maybe a more useful service to do an after action review, to watch a recording from the event and to analyze it together, to take a look at, okay, so how did that go? How did this land? Was this part clear? The sentence when you said it, here's how it came across, or the impression that it made. What did you think of it? And so that's the first thing that came to my mind when I was listening to the talks. And I'm like, maybe watching the video together could make sense. But then we have the whole layer of these people who were on stage being incredibly busy in their day-to-day life.
I think that leads us to the core of this problem, which is that there are people here who we feel, and who others, not just the two of us, but who some people feel could use this help. And it would make everybody's lives better. It would make their lives better. It would make the speeches they gave better. It would make listeners. It would actually improve things quite nicely. But they don't necessarily see it or agree. And yet they're in a position where they get to decide. And that means that the places where I've seen this done successfully have been at places where you couldn't get out of it. One of the things that I hated as a TEDx speaker, the last time I applied to be one, was that I wasn't allowed to just come talk. I had to do this coaching thing. But the plus part was I actually learned some stuff. You know who was running that TEDx event where I ended up not being on stage, but actually learning a couple of things about speaking? That was you.
I still actually, so fun fact. Last year I went to the College of Extraordinary Experiences, which obviously you organized. And it was the first time I got to see you. No, sorry, 2 years ago after the pandemic. And yeah, you were applying to be a speaker at our event. And then I said, okay, Klaus doesn't want to work on his talk. He just wants to show up and talk on the spot. I can't believe I'm doing this, but we have to cut Klaus. and and then and this was me being true to myself. I'm like, okay, I have this certain approach that we have to this. And I watched the recording and I'm like, this is not as good as it can be. I know what this can be. It can be insane, and it's not. And I don't want it to be not insane. So we cut you. And then I was invited to come to the college. And then I was thinking, okay, am I going to be able to look Klaus in the eyes ever again? So I stood by my decision. but it was not easy, right? And this is to your point with candid feedback and being that person who goes, oh my God, I can't believe I'm doing this. And I need to do this, right? I need to speak my truth or speak in what I believe in. Yeah. So it was me who was leading that TEDx at that time.
And I'm glad you did it. And I'm glad that after getting through the what do they know phase, I thought, okay, here's some stuff, here's some actual useful, because I got the feedback and I also talked with you about it. And I talked with Robin, who is the speaker coach, and I learned some stuff because there were good points. And there were some things where I'd been sloppy and I wanted to do too much. And I'd had some things that could have been better and all these things that were good. But the only reason I did that coaching was because I was forced to. And the only reason that I didn't get mad at you, but instead said, hey, thanks for sticking to your principles, was because I know you and trust you and like you. And you still had that feeling of, oh, right?
Can I show my face at the college again?
Exactly, right? And now imagine you're not in a trusted position. You're not in a position of kind of shared vulnerability.
Oh God. Yeah, you're right.
Then it's really hard to be that person.
Oh my goodness, you're right. I mean, I haven't thought about it. I mean, now that you say it, it seems so obvious. But if it was the same thing and I didn't know you the way I did, I probably would still do what I did. But I would probably, I mean, I haven't thought about it now for years. Now you've brought it up and now it's fresh in my memory and we can giggle about it. But I can imagine some of the other speakers that I was working with where we didn't have the trust. And I'm like, okay, to them, I'm probably persona non grata for the rest of our lives, you know? You're right about that. Who does she think she is, right?
And that's tricky. That's part of it. So there's a decision for you to make, is this worth burning bridges over? Because it might be. And it might be that the willingness to burn bridges will be part of your selling point.
Oof.
If you are going out to the world and saying, I'm the no bullshit advisor, then if you only have happy clients, then you're doing something wrong.
That's tough, huh? Even as you say it.
It's tough. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily the route to go. I'm saying that if we're looking at it from this way, then that's part of it. So that's the direct route. If we look at the slightly indirect route, what can be done? And I think one of the things that can be done, that's of course a little bit of a tall order for somebody who's not necessarily that tall. Iryna's not super tall, but is a huge personality, which is why and she's now dying laughing, luckily silently, is that one of the problems isn't the people. It's the people who hire them or vote for them or give them the stages. As long as we keep putting people on stages who really shouldn't be there or who could be there in a better way, then we're going to see the same of this problem. It's a little bit like how part of toxic men, which is a little bit of a hot topic these days and also a very relevant one. Part of the problem with toxic men is that a lot of these young men who are insecure and looking for role models, they see the toxic men getting the ladies. And then they think, oh, I don't agree with that, but I guess I have to be that guy.
Like positive reinforcement for a particular kind of behavior. Mhm.
Reinforcement, right? And if that's a thing in people's love lives, then it's definitely also a thing in their careers. That if you create an event and you say, this is not about the people who have the most credibility, this is about the people who have enough credibility and can deliver on it. That mindset shift is going to be huge for a lot of events. Because right now, the way a lot of events are sold, they're sold via credibility. And they are organized via credibility. The moment you've got that McKinsey or that Disney or that whatever on your shoulder, that Procter and Gamble, then suddenly you're welcome on that stage, whether you're good or not. And I think that as long as we keep reproducing that, which is hard, then we're going to see this problem. And then it's up to these few brave souls who say, you know what, I've taken it upon myself to make people mad and create a bad mood and fix things, which is a thing, but it's also pretty exhausting and not necessarily something that will get you invited into the spaces you want to be in.
I had this almost, it was an unintentional prototype of what else this could look like. So there must be another way. I think well, there must be there's a million other ways, right? It's just a matter of discovering what they are. So a mini prototype that unintentionally happened because I last week I was at the event for business leaders, and then one of the speakers, we had a chance to do a bit of small talk in the evening during the dry run as we were waiting for other people to test their microphones. And while we were doing the small talk, I said, "Hey, like, actually, you know what? I work on public speaking, and then tomorrow you'll be on the panel if you want to. I'll be scanning things anyhow. So I can just write down some of the things I notice and I can share them with you tomorrow." And he's like, "Yeah, I'd love that." And then the next day we did actually meet and I had a couple of things and some of the things that I did enjoy and I appreciated, and some of the things that were quite confusing for me. And most of them were the general sentences. And something that was new is it was almost like offering something to a friend, let's say, because there was this easy vibe where I just went to an event. I wasn't working on this. I didn't have anything to deliver. Most importantly, this was almost an action after action review, right? So it was right after the event. And I wrote a couple of quotes and I said, these are the things where, either I got lost or it was harder for me to follow you, or I couldn't keep up anymore, or it felt like we were going too deep into the rabbit hole, or rabbit hole had more rabbit holes than I could handle in a speech. And what I noticed this particular time, apart from the person looking very attentively and actually taking notes, which was nice, it was that it was important for the person to have a chance to explain themselves. So I had what was crucial and was new to me, because I had these things to say and I had a list of them, right? That I would reduce the amount of things that I was sharing, and I would share one, and then the person would provide their perspective, and then we would take a look at, oh, okay, this is what you really meant. Okay, how do you say that? And the person would give me an example, and then as they gave me the example, they came alive because it was a true story, something that happened in the office or something they've lived through, and they would light up and their eyes would get shiny and their hands would start moving. And I'm like, okay, next time if you talk about this, say that, say exactly that, not the general statement that you've used before, right? We should focus on our people, but tell me the story. And then we would look at each other for about just like a second, and then smile quietly, and then we'd continue to the next point. And then I could also see after a while, with about 3 or 4 points that could be improved, I could see that it was enough. Even though I could potentially keep going, but the container for today was full. And it was also new for me to realize, and potentially also in my own work, just because I can give more, and it seems to me that my job is to complete the list. Probably more importantly, my job is to prioritize the list, but also to see how's the person doing and how are they doing on the receptive side. And you said the trust, it was interesting that it's possible to have that trust quite quickly if the person knows that every step on the way is like, I'm going to be on your side, and also this is like a training module, in Matrix, the scene with Neo and and Morpheus when they're in the training module, and he's getting beat up while he's learning to train. But the purpose is this is a training module. And something that I was thinking about as well with, if you think of, I mean, I was in production, but if you think of IT, right, and my partner's in IT and he works, their code goes into production environment, but first it goes into testing. And I was thinking, when we speak, especially at events, if the person wasn't preparing, it's as if their verbal code doesn't go into testing; it goes straight into production. So all the bugs, everything comes out on stage, right? So the verbal code goes straight into production. It doesn't have that testing environment. It doesn't go through the QA process. And then I was thinking, interesting. That it's rare that we would have, say, we start this podcast, we have this conversation, and then we go, we've done the dry run. Let's do this again now, right? Rerun the podcast. Like we're not planning to do that, and it would be very rare, or to do that for every single question, to do that for every single point, or in conversations in life. We had a fight. Let's say, imagine we have a fight with somebody, with a friend or a partner, and we go, okay, we've done the dry run of the fight. Let's do this again now, but properly. Like we go straight into production all the time with the words we say. And I don't have a conclusion here, but it was something that I was thinking. I'm like, yeah, the verbal code goes straight into production, no testing. And then where is the space when we can learn? Where is the space when we can make the mistakes and go, okay, let me clean that up. Let me rewrite that.
I like that. I like that a lot. It reminds me of my old Finnish friend, Juhana Pettersson, who said he went to one of our wizard school events in Poland. He said, going to this event is a great training for going to this event.
Going to this event is a great training for going to this event. Okay.
And that meant when he came back and did the did like I think he was at number 3 and then he came to number 5 or so. It meant that he came with a much better understanding of how to get the most out of the event. Now, the tricky thing is a lot of the things we do, there is no dry run, or the event only happens once, right? Like playing the World Cup final in football is probably insanely good training for playing the World Cup final in football. But most people, if they even get to do it once, they don't get to do it a second time. So part of what you're addressing here, and I really like, is that we're so used to moving on. We're so used to going directly into production that we don't allow time for testing, or testing is hard or it doesn't feel natural, just as with this podcast, right? Do we do it again afterwards, where we find out, okay, we listen to it together, we find out what were the really interesting points, and then we dive deeper into them? It would probably be a better conversation, but it would also feel forced and weird and strange, and we'd have to kind of get used to that. So I think there's something there. But more than that, I think you hit upon something extremely interesting. Because when I go to events and talk, which happens all over the world in all sorts of industries, so it's not just one industry, it's a massive array of different industries and spaces. One of the things I notice is that if there are other speakers and I get to meet them, and I say, then they'll ask me, hey, how was it? And if I then say, well, I liked it, but if you want some feedback, I'm happy to share a few pointers, then that's a completely different dynamic. And I will ask them and say, hey, Joe, how was that? How was it? And then if he says, well, I really liked it, but I think you were a little bit weak here, or you do this thing with your hands, or I didn't really get that, then I'm in listening mode, as you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the power dynamic is very different. It's not self-serving.
Mm-hmm. I can sell you something. Yeah.
Where maybe just by saying this on the air makes it slightly suspect. So to all our listeners out there, part of what we do is reveal the dark secrets. Maybe the service, I'm not sure this is realistic, but it would damn well be effective. Maybe the service is to embed a speaker coach as a mole and co-speaker.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Because part of the problem is changing the power dynamic.
I don't have an opinion on that. Like sometimes, sometimes if I hear an interesting opinion, then immediately I have a point of view. In this case, I don't, but I do take it with me into just think about it. Hmm.
And I don't think that's the answer, to be fair, because it's also impractical
Mm-hmm.
but I think that it hits upon the core, which is changing the power dynamic to a place where people feel that the person is trustworthy
Yes.
and doesn't have an own interest in it.
Interesting. So here, what I'm thinking of is because it's usually about the feeling, right? And how can we to have the interest of the event at heart and to have the interest of the speaker at heart, how can we hack that feeling and to get into that feeling of trust? Because it's almost like a dynamic between sometimes in trainings I laugh that it's that I'm like a slightly taller Yoda, to continue with the tall jokes, or like a slightly younger and better looking Gandalf when it comes to the process. That it's not, I'm not, we're not exactly in the same, we are in the same boat, but we come into that boat from very different perspectives. And also stating that every step of the way, I'm on your side, even when sometimes it doesn't feel like it. And also, please communicate when it gets too much. So because I know I can keep going for quite a while and you need to tell me when, okay, my container is full. But it's interesting. I completely agree with you because on one hand, the person needs to trust that you do know what you're talking about. If you just give feedback, but they're like, okay, I completely disagree with that. That's nonsense. Right. Regardless whether we have the trust or not, we just go like, well, you don't know what you're talking about. It doesn't really matter what you think. But then going into the space of, I do believe your opinion is valuable. And how can we build trust quickly enough in a situation where we don't have years and years to build it, or we know each other, or we can. It's an interesting design challenge.
Especially when we have a credibility problem. And when I say that and leave it hanging, it's because most of us aren't Hollywood famous. And that means that if somebody who's really top level comes and offers assistance, most of us will say yes. I've, for example, seen Hillary and Bill Clinton talk on stage. They were good. They were really good, especially she's great, but he's brilliant. because his level of she came off as incredibly smart, he came off as incredibly human. And if I had the chance to get coached on public speaking by Bill Clinton, I'd take it in a heartbeat. And it doesn't even have to be Bill Clinton level. But if somebody comes to me from some event and says, hey, you should meet Patrick. Patrick's our speaking coach. Then I'm an arrogant enough bastard to think, yeah, are you going to pay me for the time where Patrick coaches me? Then I'm game. If not, then you can forget about it. And most of us don't have access to Bill Clinton. And Patrick might be brilliant, right? Patrick might be better than Bill Clinton. But the trust and the authority isn't there. Where if we could just get Bill Clinton to do all the coaching, then we're fine. Problem is, how do we crack that nut without having Bill Clinton?
And then you also have the thing where, depending where the person is starting, maybe having Bill Clinton would be completely, what's the English word, debilitating, because they're not at that level, right?
Oh yeah, it would be completely wrong, right?
Right. So where you actually need somebody, I mean, so for example, language wise, right? If you're learning language in the very, very beginning, you do need, at least at some point, somebody who knows what it's like, or approximately understand what it's like to be at that level. So if you get a trainer who can only do speaking engagements, they won't take you there as quickly as somebody who can explain grammar or some of the basics to you, at least the very basics, right? So you also need to have the coach who's adjusted to your needs. So say public speaking for an actor or for a journalist would be very different, or a trainer who they would need is very different to somebody who just kind of figured it out on their own without having a natural proclivity or talent for it.
No, definitely. And part of this, you might want to listen to the episode where I talk with Mathias Vildbjerg Jørgensen, Danish actor who does like stage presence training for speakers. And we were talking about how to get people who are experienced and who think they're good, how to get them on board. And with them, and I was an easy example because I was in his target group, just like here, it's much easier to say to them, hey, you're great. If you want to get even better at this particular thing, then I can help, instead of saying, I can make you good, right? I probably have a much easier time. Let's say you and I go out and sell this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And if we go out and say, hey, Mr. Executive or Fräulein Executive, we'll make you into a better public speaker. Most of them are not going to give us the time of day, let alone talk to us about what we're offering. If you go out and say, I will teach you how to get even better at connecting with people from the stage in a human way, then you're extremely believable as that. Anybody who's seen you do that will know that you're extremely good at that. And even though they think they're good, they don't think they're as good as you are. And if I say, I'll teach you a bit of the rock and roll magic on stage, then usually they will say, yeah, I like that because I think I'm good, but I'm not you in that regard. The tricky thing is that it needs to be hyper specific for them to think that they might need or want to get better. Whereas as long as we're just saying become a better public speaker, it might be true, but it's not going to play into their self-image.
100%. You know what now? What I'm thinking of, it's also, I remember back in the Procter and Gamble days, we had this particular reader who would always go, let's go granular, let's go granular. And it was almost a joke at some point, but it was so helpful because we started to speak like that. And in this particular case, if I was going to take what you just said and go granular, then that could potentially mean not just say how to sound human or authentic from stage. Thank you for the compliment. This is how I like to think of myself, and it's beautiful to hear that as feedback. So to take, for example, a piece of a speaker's presentation, it could be something like 15 or 30 seconds. And what you said about acts of service, which I don't know if it's a sustainable business model or not, but to take 15 seconds of a speech or 30 seconds of a speech and to say, hey, here, let's take a look at this. Here's how that came across. Here are 2 or 3 other ways that could have come across. So here are 2 or 3 other ways this could have been improved. And of course, so then the downside of that, right? It requires serious investment on the side of the person preparing this, for example, myself in this case, and then with no guarantees of getting anything back. But then the upside also is if the person really goes, oh yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for, because they might not even know that they were looking for it, or or they felt they weren't quite there, but this was the best they could come up with. And then there is concrete specific suggestions. So in this particular instance, you could have done this, and that, or you could have approached it a little bit differently or tilted it or adjusted slightly the words that you were using. then it's almost like a scalper chart, right? So we kind of go into the speech as a surgeon and we take a look at specific words. But then the question is, is it an overkill? And then how much would a service like that afterwards have to, like, how to price the service? Because that is so much attention to detail with surgical precision.
So I think the nice thing about surgery, if we don't think of it as volunteer surgery, like the stuff you're getting done because you want to,
Yes.
but think of it as a spear that's penetrating your gut instead. It needs a very sharp, very thin point.
That is fantastic. I love that. Say it again.
Let's not look at this as voluntary surgery, but as
Mhm.
somebody penetrating your gut with a spear, right? So it starts with a very thin, very sharp point, and then it widens, the blade widens. Because once you're in, if you do 15 seconds and they say, I'd like to get better at those 15 seconds, or I'd like your help on that, even if that's a very small thing, then it opens up for, oh, by the way, now I think of it, maybe I also could use help with my stage presence or my body language or my eye contact or my all these sorts of things, because now suddenly the trust has been created and it's much easier to expand on the need and look more critically on the need, right? One of the things that is very, very classic when you're helping somebody, when you're doing coaching, for example, is that they start with one thing and then that leads to another. Somebody will come and say, hey, I could use help with my pricing. And then before you know it, you've not only helped with the pricing, but you're also helping build the organizational culture and the whole brand and the leadership challenges. And oh, by the way, there's some personal dark stuff from childhood that you also need to deal with. But this person would never have come and said, hey, I'd like your help with dealing with some childhood trauma. But they will say, I'd like your help with pricing because that's safe and that doesn't feel like it's a problem. It feels like it's a need, but it's not something that they feel bad about. So if we want to reach these people who really think they're great, whether they are or not, then I think the best way to do it, if we either the very truthful and hope it shines through, or the hyper specific, right? Matthias, who I mentioned before, as a trained actor and an experienced actor, most speakers know that they're not trained actors. So when he talks to them about projecting emotion on stage, even good speakers will say, I'd like to learn that. And you're an actor. Where if he just went out and said, I'll teach you how to be a public speaker, most would say, oh, but you're an actor. What do you know about that? By the way, I'm the vice president of yada, yada.
And then a few things show up. The first one is when I was studying innovation, we had this professor, Yulia Izmalkova, and she does research. Her company does research. And she would talk to us about when we do, she would talk about truth. And she said that in research, you need to factor in for the fact that people lie because they want to look better than they are, or that's one of the main motivations. And you need to factor for that as somebody building the research when you design innovation. And she would say the truth that the person didn't ask for is aggression.
Mm-hmm.
The truth that the person didn't ask for is aggression. And I was thinking, now there's the fine balance between doing these 15 seconds and then giving people the truth they didn't ask for, unless you come in with, hey, I have a few observations about these 15 seconds. Would you like to hear them? Right. So then you ask for permission and then you go from that space. So that was the first thing that showed up for me. Second thing that showed up, it was there are these memes these days where they're especially popular in Ukraine because quite a few people are doing therapy and quite a few people are doing English lessons because, you really don't know where things are going to go, but you do need help. And then there are quite a few memes that I've seen recently, especially involving cats around when your therapist cancels. So you go to your English teacher to tell them how you are, how you've been, how you're feeling, and what's going on in your life. So you kind of transfer one thing to another, which is when you're talking about you come to do the pricing, and then you end up talking about childhood trauma. So there's that. And then the third thing, which is the kind of looping back to the beginning with people not being aware. Somebody I was working with, he's a wonderful business leader. And it was the kind of person who was looking to improve and now kind of connected. So to be practical, in the beginning, when I started working, I would ask people to send me a recording. So we work with data because it's not, if without, this is the word I'm practicing and getting rid of that. That's my filler word. So I get the video because I want to see what the person talks like in whatever setting is natural to them. So in his case, it was a business presentation online. And then as a general feedback, I replied and I said, okay, in my assessment, it's 2 out of 10. here are things we need to clarify. And then we were working on improving some of his public speaking for about 3 months, or even more than that. And then I trained his team and another part of his team. But the point of it is we became really good friends. And after we finished working, we were having coffee one day just out in town. And he said, I've never told you this. When we started working together, like I reached out to you because I heard the kind of work you do and I thought that was useful. But when I sent you my video and you came back with the most casual reply of, well, I think it's 2 out of 10. He's like, I was shocked. I was angry. I'm like, what do you mean 2 out of 10? I'm leading a sales team, like I'm leading a team of account managers. We're making multi-million-dollar deals. What do you mean I'm 2 out of 10? And it was incredible. I mean, like now looking back, it's also his humility at the time and also going, okay, this woman must be crazy, but I will continue learning from her. And in the end, it was a successful thing. But it was fun to hear that, that the story behind the 2 out of 10. What do you mean it was 2 out of 10? I thought it was at least 7 or 8, and like getting into 9 or 10.
And that could have easily, and I love that because that could have easily broken it off right there, right?
Yes.
That's huge credit to that guy for just saying, okay, you know what? I'm angry. I think she's wrong, but I'm willing to listen. But that's also rare.
Yes.
It's much easier just to say, what does she know? Now, you preempted a little bit, but we're going to do it anyway, just so I follow my formal script here, because we're
right.
getting to the round off phase. And there I do two things. One is the first one. The important one is to say thank you for coming to not just me, but to our listeners with your challenges and your troubles, or at least parts of them. That is both useful to me and it's also useful to people out there, and it takes a bit of bravery. So thank you for that. Right?
Pleasure.
And the second is, and you almost did this already, but you can find new ones if you want to, is take a moment and think of 3 things you take away from this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
You can just reuse the 3 you just did if you want to, but you can also think of 3 other ones if that fits better.
Mm-hmm.
3 things that you take away from our conversation today. They could be positive, they could be negative, but something that's going to stick with you.
I liked one of the things from the very beginning that I'm taking away is I haven't really thought about the fact that people might simply not be aware how they're doing, that they just don't have the point of reference. And within that, the specific thing that you gave me almost as a tool is when people ask, hey, did you like it? To say, I'm going to rephrase that question. Hey, did you like it? I'm going to answer it, but let me rephrase that question first so I can be more specific, or I can offer you something else. So that was the first thing. I loved the part that we invite people to come. There was the thing that I asked you to repeat. And I wrote it down. We hire people because of what they know, and we ask them to come back because of how they perform. Definitely. I haven't thought of it that way. So that's definitely a new angle. And then towards the end of the conversation, we went into being more granular, right? So it's not a fully formed thought yet, but it feels like there is some kind of connection between building trust and going very small. So it's almost like doing a teeny tiny favor, like with this, a little bit of feedback, or let me give you this 15-second thing that potentially could be a little bit different. And that there might be some kind of, it's not fully formed yet, but correlation, causation, I don't know, but between building trust enough to start the work and giving the people that feeling of being seen in terms of those 15 seconds. So something around that. The third one is not fully formed yet, but I feel there is something there.
Thank you for sharing those 3.
And I will go check out the podcast with Mattia as well.
See, that's how I market the podcast. I just get people to be on it and tell them they should listen to other episodes. Now, the last thing to do here is not for you and it's not for me, but it's for all of our listeners out there. And that is to say thank you for listening in and being flies on the wall for our conversation here. This has been the Innovation Coaching Podcast. You've heard Iryna Oleksiuk, and you've heard me, your host, Klaus Wastel. Thank you for listening.